Hello, and welcome to my presentation for my subject knowledge for teaching practice-based assignment. In this presentation, I will explain to you my rationale for my resource, why I have chosen this, and the challenges to the rationale. I will explain how my resource works and how it fits into the landing point of a sequence of 3 lessons, and how it also fits into the overall scheme of work. I will critically review the use of the resource and its effectiveness, and share my thoughts of how it could be improved. Firstly, I looked at how drama is taught in my placement school across the year groups, and then chose a year group and a class to focus on creating a resource for. My placement school follows Jonathan Neelan's 3 modes of activity in drama education: make, perform, and respond. These 3 modes are largely agreed to be core principles of drama education, and at my school are carried throughout a student's journey from Year 7 all the way to Year 13. Because of this, it is important for students to get effective practice in all 3 of these principles. I found that the one principle that students struggle with most is the respond. This is often because in order to respond and improve effectively and give a higher level of feedback, they need to use key drama terminology. This is important as in the EduCast, GCSE and A-level exam boards that my school uses, they need to be able to evaluate their performances using this vocabulary. Therefore, this skill to respond to pieces of drama, both their own and their peers, is crucial to build from the early years of drama education. Therefore, I believe that scaffolded verbal feedback leads to better written evaluation. I believe that if students can confidently use key drama terminology verbally when providing feedback and evaluating, then they will be more confident when using the terminology in written evaluation. One key reasoning for this is that I use verbal feedback after most, if not all, performances students do in class, both peer feedback and teacher feedback, so students know how to give verbal feedback already. Scaffolding this feedback to include drama keywords and critical thinking, building on students' prior knowledge on how to give feedback, should then make writing evaluations easier, as they should be able to see the link between what I am asking them to do vocally and written. When looking at what drama vocabulary to focus on, I first looked at the scheme of work I was teaching and what words are the most important for students to use. When looking around, I found numerous sites and books that mentioned the same keywords as I also found in the EduCast GCSE and A-level guides. Academic sites such as BBC Bitesize, the Oak National Academy, and Bert's Drama, and books such as Theatre in the Secondary School Classroom by Patterson and others. So I knew that there were 5 keywords I wanted to focus on, and I wanted students to feel confident when using, those 5 being pace, pitch, pause, power, and tone. Limiting my focus to these 5 words allows me to create a more focused resource, and also allows me to create a focus for the students, so as to not overload their cognitive load, which Sibley and West talk of. Next, I looked at a scaffolded and simple way of evaluating performances, using language like what went well and even better if. This language is used often in drama classrooms when giving feedback or evaluations, and it is key language to know when giving feedback in any subject, as I saw in research by Ferguson. However, it is also a simple way of thinking critically, which Balin talks of being of importance in drama education, and especially key for this topic I am teaching, as they will have to think critically to evaluate their own work. Another important thing that I kept in mind was this idea of scaffolding the process to keep it accessible for all students. Gonulan and Lowen are just one example of research into the idea of scaffolding as a pedagogical tool. In order to support all students in my class, I wanted this resource to be structured in a way that allowed all students to be able to access and engage with it, but also left room for me to push them further with extra questioning if needed. There are, however, some challenges to this rationale, one of which is the importance of the students knowing the keywords well enough to use them effectively. Whilst there are effective ways to ensure students know the definitions to keywords, as I found in research by Driver et al. In 2015, where they worked in other creative subjects like dance, music, and art, however, whilst they could define the keywords, I need them to be able to use them to evaluate their own work. Therefore, knowing the definitions alone is not enough. Secondly, there is a risk that students who struggle may copy the answers of other students when giving the verbal feedback. Now, while some, like Zander et al. In 2020, do claim that copying can be good, as students get a chance to learn from each other, the task that I am building them towards with this resource is a written individual evaluation of their work. Therefore, if they copy during the scaffolded verbal feedback, they might go on to struggle with the written elements they have to complete. The way that I have chosen to use the resource I have created is during a Year 7 scheme of work to do with voice, specifically with their Jabberwocky poem project. Over 2 lessons, the students record their own version of the Jabberwocky and their own soundscape. In Lesson 1, they record their own version of the poem in groups, each getting a verse each. They give verbal feedback and then re-record it with their improvements. In Lesson 2, they repeat this process but with a soundscape to give the poem more atmosphere, again giving feedback and re-recording it. Then, in the 3rd lesson, they listen back to the final edited recording of both poem and soundscape together and have to write an evaluation on their performance. The resource I created was used in the 3rd lesson for students to give scaffolded verbal feedback on their performance before then writing their evaluation. The 2 lessons prior to this use of my resource allowed me to gain an understanding of how my students gave feedback already and who I would need to push and who I would need to support. This Jabberwocky task sits just before their Assess to Radio Drama project, and therefore is an important last practice of all their skills, both practically making and evaluating their work. Therefore, having this scaffolded practice is imperative in making students feel confident in their skills, especially the written element, as this summative assessment is focused on their written evaluation. This is also a practice of their application of key words and assessment of how they used these phrases. This practice, whilst being key as it is the focus of my resource and work with the students, is also key in GCSE and A-level exams. As my images of the EDUCAS exam specification earlier showed, the language I am teaching my students to be confident with now is the same language the exam board expects students to use in their GCSE and A-level exams. So, not only am I preparing them for their summative assessment, but I am also laying the groundwork for good drama terminology knowledge if they choose drama GCSE and A-level. The resource itself was simple but effective. Using the 5 key words I had chosen and the what went well and even better if language that scaffolds critical thinking, I created 5 lollipop sticks, each with a key word and one side with the green what went well with the key word and the other side with the red even better if and the same key word. This allows for a couple different uses, either led by me as the teacher putting out the lollipop stick and showing a student a side of it, and them having to give me the verbal feedback based on the side showed to them, or the students themselves could pick out a lollipop stick and give verbal feedback based on a side they choose. Whilst this may be a more fun and engaging use for them as students, They may also choose to pick the easier side for them to answer. However, as Anderson in 2016 argues, giving students that choice can boost student ownership of their learning and then foster engagement. There is also no reason why I cannot then push students who choose the easier side with further questioning to get a more detailed and higher level answer. When reviewing the use of my resource, pictured on the left of the screen, I noticed 3 key positive takeaways. One positive I noticed when using this resource is that all students were able to engage with it, regardless of academic ability, and it also allowed each student to use key drama vocabulary in their answers, which some students had struggled to do in the past. Because it accommodated all students, they all gave answers that I could stretch by questioning them further. The resource was also effective at structuring the students' use of drama vocabulary, so they were using it how I wanted them to, and in a way that is key when looking at exam years. Lastly, the resource was effective at building the use of what went well and even better if language that is used in drama all the way to year 13 and is key when thinking critically within drama. Whilst there was plenty of good with my resource, I noticed that there were 2 key issues that in order for it to be more effective I would need to solve. Firstly, I used it during a register to ensure that every student got a chance to use the resource equally. This, however, meant that I didn't use it in the most engaging way for students. This is something that is so important in teaching, something that is mentioned in lots of teaching research, such as Finn and Zimmer in 2012. So using it in a more engaging way is going to be important moving forward. Secondly, it took a while to get through every student when using it, as students took time to think about their answers before giving them. However, this then gave other students a chance to be disengaged, but also meant that students who had given their answers then had time to forget what they had said before writing their written evaluation, which it could be argued then negates the positive effect of giving the verbal feedback in the first place, as they cannot simply apply what they had just done to their written evaluation. From these thoughts, I found that there were 3 key rooms for improvement for this resource. Firstly, some students are nervous when giving verbal feedback. I wondered if there was a way I could support those students more with this resource to reduce some of those nerves. Something along the lines of not having to do their answers in front of the whole class, or potentially using the resource during a think, pair, share task so they give feedback in pairs. Secondly, students were able to use the resource effectively. I wondered if it could be even more effective if I introduced it earlier on in the scheme. I think that whilst being able to use the resource more often and then build on it and push them to give more detailed answers would be good, I think the overuse of the resource would not help the students, as they could potentially lose engagement with it. And lastly, some students gave better verbal evaluation than written. Is there a way I can make a written version of the resource to support those students? For example, could I also create a writing frame for those that struggle using the same language for my current resource to support them both when giving feedback vocally and when writing it down? Some comments from my teacher mentor who observed the lesson in which I used my resource follow my own thoughts from the lesson. They saw the same positives I did, in that students were engaged and listened to each other as well as gave reflective responses. They also noted that the majority understood all the terminology when giving their responses, supporting the argument that this scaffolded approach helps them to be more confident using the key words. They also noted the same issues that I did, in that students could become disengaged as the process took a while. These are helpful for me, as it shows that the aim of the resource was met and it was helpful for students. But those rooms for improvement are still valid, and I aim to improve the resource moving forward. One way I aim to improve it, based on other comments and my thoughts of different uses of the resource from earlier, is by making the resource student-led and allowing them to pick their own keyword lollipop stick, and by also potentially using a randomizer on the board to change the order students use the resource in, making it much more engaging. This resource was inspired by the need for students to be able to use key drama terminology when thinking critically about their work, and how we can scaffold this ability from the early key stages, building students' confidence and ability to give good verbal and written evaluations. It also served a secondary purpose in my specific scheme of work, to prepare students for their first summative assessment in drama, which consists of a written evaluation. I felt that this resource was successful in both purposes, as students were able to give verbal and written evaluations using the language they needed to be confident in using, and it has supported them as they prepare for their assessment. I am happy with the progress students made across all the academic abilities in the class, and I am keen to repeat this resource across different topics and year groups. I can see it being a fun revision resource for exam years to keep their drama terminology fresh in their minds when this terminology is so important. I can also see it being adaptable to incorporate other skills in drama, such as being able to define key terms. Thank you for listening to my presentation.